Okay, I've been talking a lot about art journaling recently, so if you haven't seen those vlogs, go ahead and check them out. I do a whole flip through and share how to do it, why to do it, and why it benefited me so much. And after I finished that art journal, I jumped back into a sketchbook, which this one I actually designed and bound myself at work back in the day. And I had it in my closet, and I just jumped into it about a year ago after I finished my art journal because it was blank and I didn't have to buy anything. And yeah, like I started to realize like shortly after I started working in the sketchbook that certain things that I was kind of like wanting to do in the art journal that I couldn't, and things that I maybe learned from the art journal. So I wanted to share a little bit of that while also flipping through some of my more recent pages, which I think are also informed by even just doing the flip through on YouTube. I feel like it helped me remember, like what I love about journaling and what I love about just working on art at home in general, just in like a cozy way, especially with things. I think one of the similarities with art journaling and sketchbooking is that nobody needs to see it. And I always laugh to myself when I say that because I'm obviously sharing them here on YouTube for anybody who wants to look at them. But that's just me doing it out of a desire to share because I also love content creation, and I never used to share art on YouTube. I would always talk about other things like where I lived and all of that stuff. And so it's been like sort of a whole evolution to even share art because I was coming from a place of insecurity. And then after a while, I was just like, this is what I actually want to talk to people about. And so I sort of made it my mission to really make sure I'm always talking about my creative process. But nonetheless, I would still 100% say this is whatever you do in your sketchbook, it's for you. Nobody needs to see it. I would say just off the bat, the size already, my altered book art journal was the size of a novel. So you could already see just having a different format just creates, different designs and stuff like that. In this case, this was actually a full page of those weird random doodles. And then I just had the back of a page that I was collaging for something else. And then this sort of face of this model, I don't know if it's, it looks kind of like Michelle Williams, but I don't think it's her. But, so, almost like it's very similar to the design of what I did in an art journal. Same thing here. I did a lot of like continuous line drawings in my art journal, but I would say that it is very satisfying to do it on a blank page because you could literally spend a lot of time just doodling and sort of letting your mind wander, which is one of the things that I really like about this process. Then this one is kind of like a wild, I always like laugh when I look at it because it started off as an ink portrait that I really hated. And I was like, how do I cover this up? So I got this architecture piece, which is actually the back of the lady that I just showed you. And so I kind of made it a mask. I liked the geometric aspect. Then I found this Banana Republic thing that sort of like randomly fit where the mouth would go. And I don't know, it's kind of like a very weird collage portrait that again, I just went with. Like, again, who cares? Like, I find it interesting in a weird way, even though it may not be something I would hang in my place. Then this is a good example of I sort of started doing the doodling and just mindless doodling to music, and I made them small and so that it took a really long time. And then after I had the doodle page, I was like, okay, that looks cool. But again, I had this scrap and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this scrap is really cool. So throw it on there. And then what happens? You suddenly like the page a lot more. And that's kind of like a theme, I feel like, throwing stuff together that you don't necessarily think of in your brain, but you look at and you're like, oh yeah, like, how did I not think of that? It's like, because you don't really think about it, you more like look at it. And I think that's, again, what I like about working in a sketchbook is that the blank page of it all, it feels almost like a whiteboard to where you're like, throwing stuff, seeing what sticks, but there's also nothing there to prompt you. So you do have to really sort of go deep into like your creative brain. This is just another really good example of using this to store, this is an image transfer that I worked on. I think I shared it in my image transfer video. I didn't really have anything that I wanted to collage it over, but I wanted to keep it. So it's like, throw it in here. If I ever want to put it anywhere, I could just cut it out as an 8x10. This is a 9x11 sketchbook. So, and I have done that. That over here is actually a page from my sketchbook that I really liked, and I just added some elements of cardboard for the frame, but that's just a perfect example of just because you have it in your sketchbook doesn't mean you can't hang it up somewhere over time, do whatever you want with it. And then this is actually something I drew from life, which is something I would definitely say a sketchbook is much better for, drawing from life, just because you have a clean slate, you know, you're working from scratch. And on this one, I wasn't crazy about the proportions, but I did kind of like the top of the, you know, the male figure. And then this I actually documented here on YouTube, but it started off just like as a still drawing, still life drawing of a water bottle that was on my table. And I added all of these doodles just to stay drawing. And I probably could have just turned the page, but at the same time, it's like, you know, that is kind of the fun where it's like now this water bottle is in a little plant world. You know what I mean? And that is kind of like the creativity that I appreciate. And then this page I actually did, it's not even finished, but I've just been doodling on this page as I've also been vlogging and doing like short form content and stuff like that, just to basically sort of keep me occupied while I've been vlogging. And that is kind of like one of the nice things about doodling that I don't think enough people talk about, is just that it is somewhat mindless by design. And it's, in that sense, it's very relaxing because it's like, you know, doesn't matter how it turns out. You're not drawing something from life where you could be like, the proportions are off, this or that. It's like, no, it's just random mindless doodles. And it's like, all I remember is that like, oh, you know, I doodled that while I was doing this vlog. That's really all that comes to play. And I think that that's kind of one of the really nice things, that sort of artistic play, creative play, not taking things too seriously, doing things that are going to benefit your mental health, make you relax. I'm like obsessed with like lowering my cortisol levels. So apparently I'm like super stressed out because all the cortisol things apply to me. So I'm like constantly trying to like de-stress. And I do feel like working in a sketchbook or an art journal is a huge way that I personally de-stress. And I know that there's research about showing that that is actually backed by science. So that's kind of why I always feel like it's important to share my work in my sketchbook and my art journals, not because I necessarily want anybody to see my random doodles, but I do want to sort of show that you don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be in a gallery. You don't have to draw well at all. You don't even have to draw. You know, you could do whatever you want in here in your own personal space. But what it is it gives you a place to go. You know, when you're stressed out, when you're bored, when you're watching TV, when you're FaceTiming, when you're vlogging, like there's no reason you can't just pick up a pen. Sure, obviously if you're talking to somebody, it could appear rude, but evidence does show, like I think they did research, that if you doodle and you have a difficulty paying attention, especially if the subject isn't super interesting, doodling can actually help you retain information. So it is a thing, like it is a science-backed thing. It isn't just like me anecdotally speaking from my experience. But I will anecdotally speak from my experience to say that not only is that true, like I will be working or doodling and I will remember something on a TV show that randomly happened like even a year ago. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I remember I was working on this page and I was watching 6 Feet Under. Like I know the page in my art journal when I was watching an episode of 6 Feet Under, and it's the most random thing because it's like, why is that implanted in my brain so deeply? And it's like, probably because it does really help you retain information. So maybe even though I was art journaling in on my dining table and I had that show just on as sort of like white noise and something that I was just binge watching, it did make me sort of pay attention to the episode a little bit more. So it just goes to show, you know, there's a lot of upsides, I would say, to working in a sketchbook or an art journal. And that's why it's really important for me to share it, even more so than work that I consider like done and that I want to share just as I made this really cool portrait. Like these things I almost feel like it's a lot more important to share because so many more people can benefit, and you do not have to be an artist to benefit from it. You don't have to draw well. You don't have to take any sort of class. You just have to have the wherewithal to just sit down and not judge yourself for a few minutes and just allow yourself to kind of like be a kid again, you know, what you would have been doing in class, you know, in high school or middle school or whatever. And so, you know, that's why I kind of just really enjoy sharing these processes with you, because it really just does benefit you so much. So, you know, if this is something you've been doing and you have other research and other things you want to share about sketching, doodling, art journaling, sketchbooking, let me know in the comments because I'd love to have a conversation about this.